What's up with it and what's going down, YouTube world? We at it again with another cool reaction video. So I hope everybody chilling. Hope everybody had a cool day today. Let's go ahead and get into today's video. We're reacting to the origins of the policing in America. And then we're going to wrap a few ticks while we go ahead and watch this video. So good looking on coming to tune in with me. Let's get into this video. Here we go.
I think there's a lot of people who say, yeah, I know the police are broken. Let's just enact the reforms that will fix it. But the question for me is, if the police are broken, when did they break? What year in American history did the police break?
Or it's always been broken. Yeah, like I said,
it seems really trite to say if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it. But nothing illustrates that.
You hear me? I'm stupid. I said, since it started. Yeah, and since the beginning, what did I say? Yeah, stupid.
More than the history of policing.
Policing, in one form or another, has existed since colonial days. In the form of night watches, local sheriffs, and militias. But it wasn't until the 19th century that northern cities such as Boston created modern police departments as we would recognize them today. These northern departments were not the first example of a uniformed, publicly funded law enforcement institution in America.
By the time the northern colonies were afoot in the 17th century, the idea of keeping track of the most valuable asset in the United States, that is, enslaved Africans, animated much of what we'd recognize today as law enforcement.
In the 17th
most valuable asset
institutions, police departments as we would recognize them today. These northern departments were not the first example of a uniformed, publicly funded law enforcement institution in America.
By the time the northern colonies were afoot in the 17th century, the idea of keeping track of the most valuable asset in the United States, that is, enslaved Africans, animated much of what we'd recognize today as law enforcement.
In the 1700s, the South saw the rise of official, salaried slave patrols, whose task was to capture, control, and brutalize enslaved people.
So in the beginning, I'm assuming, or I believe that when the United States was forming, the southern colonies was the first to form before they started, I guess, before they started concentrating and going to the northern part, like New York and up, what's the 13 colonies? Boston, Massachusetts, and everything like that. New Hampshire. So I believe the first colonies may have been started in the South, but in 1619, if most of the society was agrarian, meaning it was all basically people just farming and shit, didn't all of these colonies have slaves? And so initially were all the colonies, the police forces formed from slave patrols? That's what that's saying, I guess.
The initial acts that empower slave patrols and militias were acts that basically empowered all white people to surveil and punish all black people.
Damn.
These slave patrols were required to serve a tour of duty, usually up to a year. Individuals were compensated for their time, but they were also penalized if they did not show up for their required service.
All white people, including white children, were expected to enforce so-called slave codes. These laws were meant to prevent...
Now that's crazy. That they can allow kids to enforce laws on African peoples.
Prevent enslaved people from organizing or rebelling. It was against the law, for example, for enslaved people to leave their plantations, gather without a white person present, learn to read or write, or even defend themselves if attacked by a white person.
Wow. Man,
after the Civil War,
crazy.
The 13th Amendment to the Constitution abolished slavery except as a punishment for a crime.
The South immediately moves to exploit this loophole by passing a series of crime bills known as Black Codes, which essentially criminalize all forms of black freedom.
So if anybody knows anything about history, those that know, y'all know the Black Codes was a set of laws that were specifically set for newly freed slaves. So meaning when slaves were free, they would make laws as far as vagrancy or being unemployed or curfew laws, something like that. Or, just make this arbitrary laws just for the sake of being able to arrest newly freed slaves. It's crazy.
They criminalize unemployment by adopting these very broad vagrancy laws that essentially criminalize any black person who can't prove that they're working. Any African American who challenges the terms of work, barters or brokers for a better deal, turns down a terrible offer, walks away from an abusive employer or a relationship with a landowner, by definition becomes a vagrant and by definition becomes a criminal.
What?
They could then be sold at sheriff's auction back to the very person who had just claimed that they were a criminal by virtue of not accepting a fair labor deal.
Wow. I did not know that was a part of it. I did not know that they had to accept being exploited, basically slave wages, or basically another form of slavery. And if they didn't accept these, if they didn't accept the exploitation, they got locked up for not being You can't make this up in America.
This practice of convict leasing earned enormous revenues for the states who lent out their prisoners, and huge profits for the companies using this prison labor in mining, railroads, and other industries.
Damn.
The new laws effectively re-enslaved those who had just gained their freedom and required new police to take over the former duties of the slave patrols.
When you have black people serving in political offices for the first time, when you have black landowners in abundance, when you have black professionals, there are Reconstruction era judges, the stakes are even higher for this everyday performance of black subservience to white domination. It is the police who will ultimately serve that function of reminding black people, in many cases, their lower status in society.
What we see is that general way of thinking about race and thinking about disorderly people never really changes. It's kind of woven into the DNA. But it's not just because individual police officers are racist. It's because the institution was literally created to make sure that wealthy and powerful people could extract labor.
But then it just so happens, like he was saying, it wasn't that every police officer was racist, but the system that I set up was a racist system. But then the racists started exploiting that system and then joining it. So, I mean, it all ties in together. It's all linked. Yeah, I mean, and then it had to start it was a racist organization to begin with. So, I believe, I would go to say anybody that would join that organization back then, knowing what the intentions was, knowing what their duties were, you're basically involving yourself in the racism. So therefore, I guess that should by technicality, or that makes you a part of the racism and the racist.
Departments in the North had a similar goal to control labor and were notoriously corrupt.
The police functioned as an expression of political elites and powerful, affluent people who essentially wanted poor people to stay in their segregated slum communities. Police often functioned as enforcers of political machines, functioned one step removed from gangs.
Police often worked in the service of business owners who were faced with growing unrest among their labor forces in the wake of mass European immigration and rapid industrialization.
The Irish.
One of the best examples of this is the Pennsylvania State Police. The institutions that precede the Pennsylvania State Police are actually private police forces which are owned by people who are running coal mines. What? And their job is explicitly to control the workers who are trying to unionize for rights.
So, even up north, they was basically saying that Oh my goodness. I mean, on top of being the slave patrols is one thing. But now when you think about it, and really it's like that, it's like this. The police are there for the rich, the elitists. The elitists and the people who can control all the wealth. They started the police organizations to prevent people from requesting better wages, better conditions, and to expect more from their employers and have rights to being employees. And so if you couple that with the beginning of them being slave patrols to again affect commerce, catch property that people consider property, you know what I'm saying? So the rich don't lose the wealth. And then
Story of policing in the United
let's
States
finish the video,
is
man.
the
We
story
gonna
of
talk about
systems
this
meant to
after.
protect
Shit.
and serve only a fraction of Americans.
This shit is wild. Like, and this is all bad
It is
business.
this history that many of today's activists point to when calling for the defunding or even the
Damn.
abolishment of police.
The cops not protecting us. We gotta protect us.
The ability to police crime or
It's
inequality
way
or poverty
clear.
or races
I mean,
or
it's
whatever
always been-
was the
I feel like this
social
fact-
problem to be solved by law enforcement was always an act of political
Damn,
power and
this shit is-
discretion. And it just so happens that African Americans have stood in that position for the longest of any other population.
But
What the history does is it allows us.
It just so happens that African Americans have stood in that position for the longest on crime or inequality or poverty or races or whatever was the social problem to be solved by law enforcement was always an act of political power and discretion. And it just so happens that African Americans have stood in that position for the longest of any other population.
What the
'Cause we was
history
bit
does
with
is
the
it allows us to decouple the idea of public safety from the idea of police.
Yeah, because it ain't about public
What
safety.
actually protects women from rape and from sexual assault, right? What actually stops people in communities, both black and white, from killing each other? What kinds of things actually help people who are mentally ill? Are those things police? And I think very quickly, once you reflect on that, you realize
Hell
the answer
no.
is no.
Hell to the no. It's not no. It's
We have to stop saying
hell
police are
no.
broken. We have to say
Hell
police are
fucking
working,
no.
and we
Sorry,
need to create another
YouTube, but that's
institution
crazy.
to do
This
public
is
safety.
crazy. And go ahead and end the video right here. Yo. Yeah. You can't tell me from watching this and learning this information now and seeing this that, I mean, to those that have known, I've known a little bit, you know, about being the slave patrols. I didn't know the fact as far as them being meant to prevent just the citizens from being treated fairly, being compensated fairly, to be able to organize, to demand more from the people that control the wealth. I mean, yeah, it's another form of just pure evil in the way the system was set up. Because again, all society, when the forming of the United States happened, was built on slavery. They had slaves. Now, they did have indentured servitude, and you know, the white supremacy part of it, and on that level comes into play later, but we can get into that in another video. But the fact that if these police systems or the law enforcement or people that are, and that's another thing about the laws, if you look at it, the laws are designed to keep us under control, at the same time protecting wealthy, but then the organization that was created to help the capitalists and the people and the rich and the class system to keep them protected is still used against us to this day. And so it's like the entire system from the, and again, it's from the top down. And that's the crazy thing about being in America. It's like it's this two-sided form system, or two ways of thinking, or two ways of being a citizen here. You know, you have this side where it's afforded more as far as leeway in the criminal system, can play games when it comes to the laws, shape and manipulate everything, and create the prison system to lock everybody up, or lock a majority of the world's population up. But the organization is based on racism and classism. And there's no wonder why the government and none of the politicians want to do anything to effectively change that system at all. And so those that are in agreement with this type of system, and the apologists for the police and the organization and everything that they do, if this is really what, and if you do a dive into the history and see if this is what it was set up upon, and you still believe that this is an organization that's here to protect you or protect your rights or even care about you as a citizen, then we all did wrong. But the black people in this country that have been suffered under the boot of the political and police system, and the government knowing in the classist system, and the government going hand in hand with the system to work together to not subjugate and control the masses. But the boot has always been on a black person's neck, black people's neck, and we've always had to deal with being monitored, controlled, murdered, locked up, imprisoned behind this system that has always been set against us, man. And this is wild. Like, damn. And they're not gonna even do anything to change the system. But man, good looking on the video. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. Man, hit those likes, hit that subscribe. Appreciate the support. I'm him, the King Cool. Y'all be cool out there.
One man army, homie. I'm riding dolo. Keep the stick with me like I'm in the game of polo.